for example, one place where I will, the seller and the purchaser is fine, is perfectly fine in this contract. I think we must just make an extra space for when there's more than one party. Okay, so the property. Okay, let's explain the different types of properties. So there's basically, in effect, two different properties. There's a sectional title property and there's a full title property. And then full title property can be split between conventional properties, your normal earth, and farm/agricultural properties. Okay. Yeah. So sectional title properties, it is all your flats, your block of flats that you know of. It is townhouses in the sectional title scheme. That is a sectional title property. So the entire scheme, the sectional title properties consists of the scheme and the unit in the scheme, and then if there's an exclusive use area, it will form part of your sale. Okay, so the unit is the section you are selling. It will be Unit 1 ABC scheme, for example, and the common property is only the park area, it's the roads and everything. You're not going to add that to your OTP. And an exclusive use area is also land that forms part of the scheme, but it is only for the exclusive use of a certain owner of the property in the sectional title scheme. It's usually a storage room, a balcony, a parking area, or a garden. You'll see it's either one of those. The client won't necessarily know that it is registered separately. So if you're ever unsure, we do a search on the seller's name, the owner's name. That's the only way we can see it. And then we will see, for example, it will be Unit 1 ABC scheme and P1 ABC scheme. Then we know that this parking area is linked to that unit. It must also be seeded together with the transfer of the property. Okay, so it's also important to know that because that increases the costs for the buyer. Because that cession of exclusive use area must be done by a notary. We as notaries, we sign a notarial cession of an exclusive use area, and it must also be registered in the deeds office, so there's extra costs relating thereto. Sometimes your client will tell you, yes, there's a garage, or yes, but it's not separately registered, something like that. If you are ever unsure, we can do a search for you on the seller's name to tell you whether it's registered separately or not. Okay. And then we have a full title or conventional title. This is the normal earth that you know. It is in your neighborhood where you have a freestanding property, and sometimes also in estates, like for example Zambezi country estate. Or I want to also mention something about the sectional title property first. I don't know, you're aware of, for example, Equestria estate, Silver Lakes. Have you been there? Okay, so how it works in Equestria, the other one I can use is Bonner Park, is also an example of that. So, but Equestria estate is a good example because it's a big estate with a lot of sectional title schemes in that estate. So all these, so it's, I don't know how many schemes, I think it's 10 to 15 different sectional titles. So it's a big gate where you're going into, and then there's a lot of schemes with more gates, and 20 units here, 50 units here. So that is an example of sectional title schemes in a bigger scheme basically. So there will be a body corporate and a homeowner association. So the buyer must be aware of that because he's going to pay for both levies and both clearance certificates. So if you do not know that as well, just ask your seller that, are there HOA and a body corporate or only a body corporate? But if it's only a separate scheme, there's usually it's only a body corporate. It's only in most instances when there's a scheme in a bigger scheme that both is applicable. Okay.
So that would essentially be the Zambezi country estate.
That one will be Homeowners Association. So that's what I'm going to be with that. So Zambezi country estate is full titles in a big scheme. So it's not sectional titles, it's full titles, and there will be a Homeowners Association. That I don't know if you've been in Bougainville estate in Montana as well. It's a full title scheme with a Homeowners Association, and I think, if I'm correct, there's also a sectional title scheme in that big estate as well. So then that will be body corporate and a Homeowners Association. But your seller will be able to advise as well.
Okay.
Yes. Homeowners Association fees are different extra fees as well. And you will see on the quotations that we issue a client, we will say provision for HOAs, clearances, provision for HOA levies, provision for body corporate certificates. The reason for that is because we don't know the exact amount that the body corporate or the HOA charges, and that's why we make a provisional amount. We add it to the account. It's important. We will obviously refund the client if there's anything extra, and we will also send him the calculations if necessary. Sometimes some HOAs and body corporate managing agents are very expensive. For example, Leadport, they ask 2,000 rand for a clearance certificate. It is absurd, but that's what they charge. We cannot do anything about it. It's what it
But the seller or the buyer pay for clearance certificate?
The buyer pays for the clearance certificate or the for the clearance certificate itself, but the seller pays for with City of Tshwane, the seller pays for rating clearances 2 to 3 months in advance. But the certificate itself is something that we must generate, we must submit on City of Tshwane that the buyer pays for. But the clearance figure itself, seller pays for it. With HOA and body corporate, only up until date of. So, for example, we ask for clearances valid until end of June. Then seller and we register tomorrow. Then there's 10 days, 11 days extra left of this month. That's when we'll use this provisional levies that we make provision for. We'll refund the seller the amount of days that he paid in advance and from the seller's provisional levies that we made. So we will ask for a levies relevant to a certain date, and that date we must pay until, and that's why it's important that we add the provisional levies and we'll refund the seller from the buyer's money that we paid him. Okay. So the seller pays until a certain date with body corporates and HOAs, and then the buyer pays for the rest. Sometimes we are lucky, we register at the end of the month, then the buyer gets actually a lot of money back because we only made provision until that end of that month. And then it's also important that homeowner association must be paid before we can lodge in the deeds office, because we need the HOA clearance certificate and we must lodge that in the deeds office as well. But with the body corporate, we can pay on date of registration because we don't have to lodge that into the badge at the deeds office. Okay. Okay, farm properties. It is important. The important thing that you must know from farm properties, it is that it can only be transferred into one person's name unless they're married in community property. So if they're married in community property, as I described it, it's one estate. So it can be in both of their names. But if they're married out of community property, it can only be transferred into one person's name. And that's why it's important also in estates, wills and estate, they will always advise, let's say for example, a person has a farm and he wants to give it to all 5 of his sons. Then they say, but you won't be able to do that because it's against, you cannot transfer to more than one person. Then usually registers a trust or a company, and where all of them are beneficiaries or shareholders, and the property gets transferred to the company or trust. Yeah. So the reason for that is that if property are being transferred to too many people, it's regarded as subdivided basically. It's not subdivided officially, it's just there's too many owners on one property. So with farm property, only in one person's name. Okay, then we go to the consideration. There's different ways that the client can pay for a property: mortgage bond, or cash, or deposit and mortgage bond, or sale of subject to property. There's many ways. So if it's a cash transaction or a deposit, it can be once off or it can be more than one installment. It depends on what they agree on. And then we as attorneys, we invest that amount into an interest-bearing account, into a trust account, and the interest will be paid to the purchaser on date of registration after we uplifted the investment. Okay, if the purchaser does not pay in time, he is in breach of the contract. So it's also important when you have a cash buyer and the client tells you it's in a 32-day account, you only get it after 32 days. You say it's fine, but you must provide me with proof of that funds within 3 working days of signature of this agreement. Otherwise, you're going to keep that property out of the market. It's as if because you have a cash buyer now, and after 32 days, this person just disappeared. So it's very important to make sure if it's a cash transaction that the client provides you with proof of that cash. So it actually has that cash. That cash was, the investment was uplifted, requested from the bank within 3 to 5 working days max. Otherwise, they're wasting your time, they're wasting your seller's time. And it's just important, just a nice clause as well, or just extra condition so that you know that you are covered. Okay, with mortgage bonds, it is when a client goes to the bank, applies for a loan, and if the client does not qualify for a bond, the OTP will lapse. Nobody is in breach, and nobody can unfortunately be entitled to commission because it's a lapsed transaction. The important thing when we are talking about bonds is that is what I also want to add to your OTP to cover yourselves. So in your OTP it says basically that the bond must be obtained. I'm gonna give you a clause that makes provision for automatic extension, for example, for 14 days. The reason for that is, so let's say for example you say, okay, the client must obtain a loan before the end of June, and then we add a clause saying, if you did not get a loan before the end of June, this period will be automatically extended with 14 days. The reason for that is because sometimes I diarize it on my side, and I think it's also important that you diarize it on your side so you can know as well if the buyer is getting a bond or not. The reason for this is because sometimes it slips through, or sometimes the addendum is not drafted in time. If it only says it must be obtained before the end of June and it was not obtained, and then 1st of July you realize, oh goodness, my buyer just obtained a bond on the 1st of June. That seller can get out of that contract saying, no, you didn't qualify for a bond in time, I'm not selling this property anymore. And we can do absolutely nothing about it because the OTP lapsed on the 31st of June. There's no OTP, it's as if it never existed. To cover yourself, rather let us do an addendum, sign it before the time period expires, and then the contract is still alive. We can say it like that. If there's an automatic extension of 14 days, it at least covers you with 14 extra days. And if you see that he's not going to get a bond within that 40 days, then we do an addendum extending that period, making provision for an extra X period of time. That is why it's important that we know the bond originators as well, because we are in contact with them, we follow up from them, how is this process going, how is it progressing, how does the financials look, and then sometimes they tell us, no, this client is not going to get a bond. Then we know at least. Or the bond originator will tell us, listen, Francisca, I see that this client is almost there. We submitted supporting documents to the bank as they requested. We will get feedback within 5 working days. But then we know that this period is going to expire within 3 days. Then we know, do an addendum now, extending it with 7 more days, for example, just to keep your contract alive. Okay, very important. Okay, then, just put it on silent. I think my phone is vibrating. I don't know.
But no.
No, my phone is vibrating, keeps on vibrating. Yeah. Okay, then there's a difference between suspensive conditions and special conditions. I think it's important that we also discuss that, so you can, if you do, you will see on this slide we also said you cannot do an addendum to a dead contract. That's why I'm saying it's very important that we do the addendum while the contract is still alive, it's still a valid period. So if we do an addendum, then even though the client signed it, one of them can get out of it. So for example, the buyer says, oh goodness, I'm not going to be able to repay this after I accepted the quotation, because they always accept the quotation, and then afterwards they're like, oh, I cannot afford this. It's not, they can get out of it even if the addendum was signed after the period expired. Okay. So suspensive condition is a condition that must be done before we can attend to the transfer. It must be adhered or met before we can do the transfer. It is a subject to sale, it is a bond approval, anything like that, but must be. So as soon as the bond is fulfilled, the property is sold, then the deal is secure and we can enforce the contract on the seller and the buyer. And then if the condition is not fulfilled, the contract lapses automatically. We do not have to deal with it further. We do not have to cancel it because there's no contract to cancel. Okay, and if you wish to extend the period, you must do it beforehand. Okay. So special condition is a condition that must be fulfilled. It does not. So it's just an extra condition that must be done before we transfer the property. So usually you will also add that in your OTP. So let's say, for example, your buyer goes to the property, he's like, oh, this wall is. He really would like the seller to repaint this wall. And if the seller says, yes, I'm going to repaint the wall, it's perfect. You put it in your OTP, seller is going to repaint the wall. We make a note of it. Before we lodge in deeds office, we ask the seller, listen, did you repaint the wall? He says yes, and then we can register. It's just an extra condition that must be met, and it's important that we as conveyancers and you as agents keep tabs on that, because sometimes in most instances the agents will tell us there was this 3 conditions that must have been done and met. If done, please proceed. Then we can also take that as a yes if it is fine. Okay. If it's a special condition and it's not fulfilled, then the buyer is in breach of the seller, whoever must have done it, is in breach, and we can also tell them then to remedy the breach. Okay. So, okay, if the condition is not fulfilled, it's in breach. If it's during the transfer process, we can place the default party on terms. So sometimes it is something that should have happened, or we were not aware of that, or if we still, let's say we registered, and the buyer now moves in on the same day. It's not common, but if they move in on the same day, we register, and then the buyer says, okay, but the seller said he painted the wall, but it's not repainted, for example. Then we actually have leverage because we still have the money of the seller on file. Then we can say, okay, we're not allowed to keep the money, but we can tell him, listen, we're not going to pay out until you fix this, until this condition is met. Then usually it's very quickly, fix it very quickly because obviously they want their money. So we can use that as leverage. So that is nice still. And that's why it's important to tell us beforehand, so we are also aware. Because if we are not made aware, we do not have that leverage. We cannot, especially when it's a client also that must move out. Sometimes it's very, agent can see that this seller is not going to move out later of registration, we have a problem. Then we can say, okay, we're not going to pay out, or we're going to give 3 months rent in advance if you're not going to move out. Then usually they move out very quickly because they don't want to pay rent into their own property basically. It's not their property anymore, but sellers are very hesitant to pay rental of the property they are basically selling. So we can also force them to do that. That's fine.
And if the seller isn't able to find another property, they're not sure where they're going, and they ask you as a condition upon the sale to stay there for 3 months so they can get their life sorted out, can we put that into the OTP as well?
Yes, you can. And that's what's very nice. And if you do not have that in the OTP and the clients agree on that afterwards, we do an addendum. And what's nice about that is we keep that 3 months rental in our trust account. We will pay to the new owner every month. The reason for that is because if we pay out everything to the seller will just decide, oh, I'm not going to pay. So we keep the money on trust, we pay it out to the clients. So we can do that in the OTP, we get that a lot, where the seller decides to stay longer and the purchaser agrees, or the purchaser says, okay, it's fine, I don't care, you can move out when you want to move out. But we must just get an addendum knowing how long they're going to stay and whether we have enough funds on file for that rental for the next few months. So we're going to get to the rental clause just now, but I want to show you why the occupational clause is very important. So the occupational clause is really important. If you, in your OTP, put in the date, let's say for example, put in registration, and even if you say that the property is going to be the occupation will be granted on registration, occupation will be given on registration, you must still put in a rental amount. The reason for that is, sometimes it happens that the seller says, listen, I got a new property, but I'm not able to move out until middle May, for example. I cannot move out, I don't have enough property. Then that amount is already agreed upon between the seller and the buyer. If we do not, sometimes they, if there's no amount, rental amount in the OTP, the clients are saying, I'm not going to pay 10,000 rand for my 3 million rand property, I'm not going to pay 10,000 rand. If you inserted that 10,000 rand before, they cannot now say, no, I'm not going to pay it, or I'm not going to pay pro rata rental. So always put in the rental amount, even though they're only giving occupation on registration. So there is not a problem afterwards. Sometimes the seller moves out earlier and the buyer moves in before registration. It's not advisable, but sometimes if they do, then there's already a rental amount agreed upon.
So the rental amount is something that the seller would basically put forward.
So
Does the buyer determine what the rental amount
is? No, that is usually no. So usually, let's say for example, you say occupation is going to be given on registration, but should the seller stay in the property after registration, or should the buyer move in earlier, this will be the amount payable monthly to the other party.
And where does that amount come from?
That amount is what the client agree upon. But
Okay.
if you do not have an amount, usually a lot of agents uses 1%.
1%, yes. 1% of the purchase price.
Yes.
Okay.
But
That's
sometimes
perfect.
it's a 5 million rand house, and then
Yeah.
it's like, no, 50,000 is a bit bizarre.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pay. Then obviously put in 25 or 20, whatever.
Oh,
you
yeah.
agree upon.
Okay.
So, so just use your discretion as well. Because if it's a 10 million rand property and the buyer moves in, or it's just a vacant farm,
Yeah.
and now you must pay 100,000 rand rent, he's not going to do that. The seller is not going to pay that. So just apply your discretion as well when we're heading to that clause. But usually residential, it's 1% of the purchase price. If it's too much, you can use that, you can apply it. It's also important that the clients know, if let's say for example the buyer says, I want to have access to the occupation of the property before registration, and I want to have access on the 15th of December, and if this buyer then decides to only move in on the 27th, you will still be liable for rent from the 15th, because that is the date, occupation date. If you moved in or not, that is the date the seller gave you access and occupation of the property. So there is no, it will be that date that he gets access to occupation, that is the date from when he will be liable for rent. Okay. Okay, then, as I say, it's important to have it's important also to know that the purchaser becomes an occupant on date of occupation and not a tenant. So the Rental Housing Act is not over a property, or it's not governing that occupational period. It's in terms of the OTP. Okay. So it is important to agree on the specifics of occupation, the date, and the occupational rent. Don't leave it to be decided at a later date, even if the contract states that occupation will be on registration. The parties can always enter into an addendum later if they change the amount. We can draft an addendum, we can say no, they're not going to pay 100,000 rand for their vacant land, it's only going to be 20,000. Can we do that? In an addendum. Okay. Then compliance certificates are also very important. So I'm just going to, electrical compliance certificates are a requirement according to law. It must be given. If there is a bond, we cannot say the seller does not want the COC, or the buyer does not want the COC. There must always be a COC when there's a bond, because the bank's interest must be covered. Okay? COC, electrical compliance certificates, are not, for electricity, are not allowed to be older than 2 years. It must be, and even if I get an instruction now, I see that the COC is only 3 months valid, I'm going to ask the seller to give a new COC. Because it's not fair to give a COC to the buyer on registration and then expiring over a month.
So the COC is the seller's responsibility.
Yes, it's one of the
whether it be expired or not. They must to make sure that it's renewed.
A new one must be issued.
And that needs to be submitted with the bond application.
No, with us. No, so the reason why I'm saying it is a cash deal. Sometimes it is, like for example, my parents, my grandma, she was very old, she's 93, and she said that she wants to transfer the property to my parents now, so that it doesn't form part of an estate transfer. So then, in this case, my parents said, okay, that because while this is going to happen, they want to apply for a bond over the property, because then they can fix things around the house. So in this case, they had to get a COC, even though it's my parents buying my grandma's house. But even though it's family, that we've been staying in that house in our entire time, because there's a bond, we must get a COC. So it's a requirement from the banks. So it's not going to the bond application. We as transferring attorneys, we give it to the bond attorney, saying here's a copy of the COC. Then they have it on file. It's important because of insurance, because the bank must make sure that the bank's interests are safeguarded. If there's not a COC and the property burns down, and it's something that could have been avoided by a COC, by an electrician fixing it and issuing a legit COC, then it's an insurance problem and things. That's why it's important to have a valid COC. Sometimes, if let's say for example my parents didn't get a bond and the property was transferred to their names, then they could have said, okay, we don't want a COC, it's fine. Because nobody's interest of being, if there's no issue, if there's no bank, there's no third party's interest that must be noted, so it's fine. We could have said, drafted an addendum or just a consent saying we're not going to do a COC. Also happens where it's a cash deals, you can do that. In where we also had a property in the Moot area. The other day, the entire property is vandalized. There's nothing, it's just a structure. The buyer bought it for I think 900,000, and even though there was electricity, there's supposed to be electricity, everything is gone. So they agreed no COC will be issued. The buyer is anyways going to rebuild the entire property, he'll get his own COC. So that is fine because it's a cash deal. It's not a problem. But we won't be held liable for it, and the agents won't be held liable for it. So it's important. Okay. With solar COCs, it's quite a grey area now. It's not required according to law yet, but we ask for the clients. If it states that there's a solar installations, we ask them please get a solar COC, or it must be added on the electrical compliance certificate. Usually don't have any problems, they provide it to you. Another important thing with electrical compliance certificates, we get a lot of issues where electricians only issue COC, but they're not really legit. Obviously they're registered because they have a number, but some of them are not doing their work properly. That's why I think it's important. But a lot of banks requires this, and I always try to get it on my side as well. Please tell your sellers if they are getting an electrician to come out. The electrician must also provide his Department of Labour and Employment certificate, where we can actually verify this enrollment number on this enrollment certificate
It's valid.
It's valid, and it's the same one on the COC. So we can see whether they are still enrolled on that letter and whether it's the same person who issued the COC. If there's any issues afterwards, we tell the client, here's the COC, or anyways give it to them on registration. Here's the COC, here's the electrician's details. You must contact the government.
The electrician, yeah.
Yes. So that's very important that we have these details. Some of the bank attorneys, bond attorneys, they insist on it. They don't want to register without that enrollment certificate as well. So just get it from the beginning. It's much easier.
From which department?
Department of Labour and Employment.
So the addition is the COC, Certificate of Compliance, is means simply for the appliance in the house, like maybe a socket, DB board, the light fitting. There's no wire running on the building like this. With the certificates, everything must be on the good condition. There must be socket working. There must safe, DB board must be working, and egg leakage must be there, so in case of a fire, and the glove and the light fitted must be in a proper way when the property is sold.
Yes, it must be
Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
But they don't test the appliances.
Oh,
So
they
the
don't
COC,
test.
yes, it's only for the electrical installations in the
Okay,
property.
yeah.
So that is important to note. The other thing, a lot of properties must be rewired. It's not uncommon because the regulations changed a few years back, many years back actually. So a lot of old houses, you'll see if you're working in an area where there's old houses, for example, Pretoria North area is a lot of old houses, and the people bought it in 1990, and now they're selling the property. Sometimes the electricity COC is more than 20,000. Everything needs to be rewired. So my parents as well, they had to do a COC. I think it cost them 25,000. From that bond money actually that they had to pay because it was the entire property had to be rewired. Earth leakages had to be installed in the outside building. It's things like that. It's very important. If your client, you can also always get a second opinion as well from another electrician. It's not necessary to only use one, but very important.
So you're saying, in essence, in order for that certificate to be updated, that inspection has to be done again. Am I understanding?
Yeah, that when
the COC, if it's not
Valid.
any longer,
a new one must be
a
issued.
new one needs to be issued. There's an entire assessment that needs to be done by an electrician all over again.
Yes, he will come in, he will check everything, test
I'm
everything.
understanding correctly,
Yes, yes. So, but sometimes as well, the client must know if they got a COC 6 months ago, but they changed the electrical installations, that one is not valid anymore. A new COC must be issued, even if it's not older than 2 years.
Okay, so then if the person has fully installed solar,
A new COC must
they
be issued.
have to do a new COC because it needs to be linked, right?
Yes,
That's
so
not what you said.
The people who install solar, who does that solar installation, they issue a new COC. They must do that. It's part of their job. So they issue a new COC saying everything is yes. They must. Yes. Okay. So with gas certificates, very, very important, it must be electronically issued. The legislation changed around that. They are not allowed to complete it with hand anymore. It must be an electronically issued gas certificate. That's where there is gas installations in the property. Gas stoves, anything gas that's a fixed gas installation in the property. Okay, the others I'm not gonna. Electrical compliance certificate, also important. It's fence certificate. If it's a freestanding house or a house where there is electrical fence around the house itself, electrical fence certificate must also be obtained. Also valid for 2 years, the same with the electrical CFC. The electric fence certificate, if it's around the complex, for example, it is the HOA or the body corporate's responsibility, your client don't have to give it to you. If your unit is a corner unit and the entire estate has electric fence around and that 2 corners or lines boundaries has electric fence over, it's the HOA's responsibility, it's not your client. But if your client added electric fence in the front, you will have to get electric fence certificate. Okay. Okay, mandatory disclosure. Okay, I think we discussed it quite in detail. With the mandatory disclosure, very, very important. Please do not accept a mandate without it. Do not let your buyer make an offer without it. It's to cover yourself. It's a lot of. You will see sometimes some agents they get a lot of issues with this. This one with the building plans, it's a very expensive mistake as well, and omission to be made. And if that seller knows that the agent can be held liable as well, he will keep the agent liable. I mean, he's already annoyed. So it is very important. Please cover yourselves. Okay. An example as well with fixtures and fittings. Don't list too much fixtures and fittings on your list, on your OTP and your mandatory disclosure, then too little. It's just better to cover yourself and be seller. If there is side guards, you see there's a side guards part and then in the seller's property, ask him, are you going to remove it, yes or no? If he says yes, you put that in your OTP. If he says the property is 2 million rand, but if I leave the side guards, if I take the side guards, I'm gonna make it 1.7, then you know what you are working with. Because if he removes expensive things like this, the property cannot be, the purchase price, it will affect the purchase price as well. The buyer is also liable to do a good inspection of the property. The buyer cannot just walk off, just call you and say, okay, I'm signing an offer to purchase on this. Never send someone to look at the property, never inspect the property himself, and then comes afterwards and say, but you didn't tell me about this, you didn't tell me about this. But he signed the mandatory disclosure and the OTP with all the defects on. He also has an obligation to do a thorough inspection of the property himself. Okay. If he wants to check somebody, if he wants to get somebody to get into the roof to see whether there's any leakages or something dodgy going on in the roof, he must send someone, he will be liable for it. If the buyer does not trust the electrician who issued the COC, it will be at his own expense, but he can get his own COC. So it will be his costs. Okay? Another thing, we had an example where there was a property was sold and there was no leakages. The property looked very well. And in summer, when it was rainy season, the roof, it leaked a lot. There was a lot of water damage in the property. And when the new owner, who's the buyer, already registered in his name for a few months, got into the roof, he saw that the seller put a lot of buckets in the roof that caught the water. So obviously that is an intention to defraud. It's an intention to deliberately
defraud the buyer.
Defraud the buyer, tell the buyer there's no leakages. So in that case, the seller was liable to fix the roof. So it's just difficult after registration because you don't have that money anymore. But in this case, it was an obvious act from the seller's side where he intentionally tried to defraud the owner. If there was no leakage, if the seller says there's no leakages, there's never been leakages, and now the buyer comes and says no, there's a leakage in the living room, it's difficult to prove it if there's no proof. I mean, how are the buyer going to prove it? So that's why it's important that they disclose everything. For example, if there's a closet that's moved, we also had an example where it was a house with a flatlet on. So the children stayed in the house and the mother stayed in the flatlet. Then the children moved out, they moved to Cape Town, and the mother stayed in the flatlet. She didn't move back into the main house. So the main house was quite dirty because there's nobody staying in there. And after the buyers bought, the property was registered in the names, transferred everything. When they opened the kitchen closets, there was a lot of termites. They ate 50% of the closets, but on the inside, it wasn't visible on the outside. In this case as well, the mother never knew. She never lived in the property. So it's something that it's going to be difficult to prove that she knew about it You see, but because she never stayed there.
And the agent doesn't know about it.
You didn't know either because it's also agents also not going to open every closet and going to see whether there's any cracks going to get into the roof. I mean, it's also not part of the seller must be open with you as well. If you see something, rather list it, rather ask the client about it. But in this case as well, the agent was not aware of the termites because he had to physically go and open all the closets, which he didn't do. I mean, it's understandable as well. So in this case, the new owner had to fix it himself. Okay, fixtures and fittings, we are there. Okay, so if a client says I'm gonna remove my expensive taps or remove my beautiful chandelier, make sure that you know what they're gonna do afterwards. You're gonna replace it, you're gonna repaint it, especially with big TVs. We have a lot of scenarios where it's a huge, massive TV, it's so heavy. Mount it in the wall. After registration, the seller removes it, leaves the hole in the wall, never repaints it. It's something that must be asked your seller, please fix. Okay. Yeah, it's just better. It's just also, if they're not going to do it, rather let them say. Otherwise, the buyer's going to be very unhappy. So in this case, the TV was so heavy, the cement in the wall, it basically, it was very bad, and the client had to fix themselves, the buyer, but he was very unhappy about it. So it's just better for the seller to also know. Just fix it. Paint over the one wall. It's not an expensive thing to do either. Okay. So the seller's responsibility. That is why I'm just going to touch it with foot stewards. Foot stewards is the liability of the seller up until registration. After registration, it's the mandatory disclosure, which covers the seller. So the foot stewards means you are giving the property in the same condition as it was on date of inspection. And if it's not in the same condition, the seller can be held liable. And that is so the FUSIS covers the client until registration. After registration, it covers the mandatory disclosure covers. Okay, so it's important. The buyer will be liable for defects after registration. Okay, then I also wanted to mention a shortfall cases because I see in the OTP it says. Just want to go there quickly. It's fine, it's just something I want to, okay. It says the seller warrants that the purchase price is sufficient to cover the outstanding bond, agent's commission, rates and taxes, electricity and water, and. I want to mention something there that sometimes clients does not even know that they have a shortfall matter. So the reason for that is, let's say for example, I bought a property with the bond last year, and I'm in the resale now. It's not even a year that I have the property, and that will mean when I resell my property, I will not have any profit from this property because I've been paying interest on this bond for the past 7 months. Nothing has went down on the capital, and I don't have anything. I won't have any proceeds, even if I'm on time with my bond. The first 3 to 5 years, if a client pays his bond, it's basically interest that he pays. It's not capital. Unless he paid more than the minimum premium, it's basically interest. So there's a big chance that it will be a shortfall matter, or they will just have a clean break, or only get 10,000 rand from this deal. So the only way how we will know it's a shortfall is when we ask cancellation figures from the bank. So there's a bond on the property, and we need to get cancellation figures from the seller's current bondholder. They will issue us with a figure. We type it into our finance sheet. Then we see, oh goodness, there's not enough to cover the cancellation figures, the agent's commission, rates, nothing. Then we let the client know, and they say, let's say for example it's a big amount, 100,000 plus. Usually they don't have the funds to pay that in. We will have to inform the bank. It's a shortfall matter. They will sign an acknowledgement of debt. After registration, they will pay off the bank. So it's important to know that as well. When sometimes a client just stops paying his bond, then there will be an interdict against the property usually. We've done transfers from banks where the shortfall amount is more than 500,000 rand. It is big. So then the client will have to pay all that amount after registration. And the bank usually accepts this offer because it's better to accept the offer than to go and sell an auction and have more expenses. Then they lose. So usually they accept it. Unfortunately, for example, net bank assisted sales, it's horrible. It takes very long. we also do F&B quick sales. It depends on every bank. They have different requirements. F&B is very difficult as well because they want figures valid, and you're only going to register within 2 months, but they want this figure now. Then usually the seller must pay in with the rates figures. For example, there's billing cycles, and we have to request figures after the billing cycle, because otherwise, if you pay 2 days before the billing cycle, they will reject this application because they took new figures 2 days after the billing cycle. You cannot pay an old figure, so that's what makes it difficult, because we have to request for new figures after the billing cycle. We have to pay very soon. Otherwise, if you wait too long, they're going to reject the application. So that's what makes it difficult with shortfalls. But it's not a difficult thing. It not necessarily takes long. It's just more. It's just more things to deal with. So if you ever get a shortfall, we will also guide you through it as well. Standard Bank, for example, is actually very easy. AXA is also very easy. They accept a lot of documents. To say it's fine and we can proceed. Then I would say it's 2 to 3 weeks extra. But with FNB and Nethome, it can take longer. SA Homelands as well, they just accept whatever comes their way. I don't know how, but they do. So it's also not that difficult with SA Homelands. Okay. If there's no interdict, then we just do the AOD. If there is an interdict, we will have to uplift this interdict before we can register. Okay. And it's not necessarily, when there's an interdict, it's not necessarily a shortfall matter. Sometimes the client's already paid more than 70% of their bond, and then they stop paying. Like one of the spouses passed away, or he lost his job, or something like that. Then they attach the property, but it's not a shortfall. So that is a very easy thing to do. We uplift the interdict, we give the guarantees to the bank, and proceed. Okay.
Sorry.
So interdict, the sheriff literally goes and serves papers on the client, and then they go and register the interdict. It is a caveat. You'll see when you do a property search at endorsements. Usually you'll see there's an I, it starts with an I, and the number ends with a C. It means an interdict caveat registered against the property. Usually it's a bond that haven't been paid. Now they attach the property, meaning the only thing why they do that is they safeguard the bank's interest. So the client, so that we know we have to uplift the interdict. It's a shortfall matter. So we know that. It's not always a shortfall matter. Sometimes it's something like, for example, some of the Mabukane or some of the extensions, they also have an interdict registered, but it's only something that notifies us that it's now a different township. It's not in Northwest anymore, now it's in Pretoria. So it's not always an interdict for bond purposes. So if you ever get a funny endorsement and you do not know what it is, just ask us, we can get a copy for you from the deeds office system. Okay? Yeah, we'll get a copy for you. So usually if it's a SB, it's a sectional title bond. You'll see the bank's name standing there. If it's a B, it's a full title bond. If you do a person search and there's an H, it means it's an anti-natural contract. If there's a SK, if it's a sectional title transfer and there's a SK endorsement, it's usually that there's a real right to extend the development. Then we also do an extra consent that the buyer signs, or it can be an exclusive use area, but not all of them have the exclusive use area endorsed like that. But if you ever get a funny endorsement, just ask. I'll do a search for you. Okay?
No problem.
Okay, so the other thing with attachments and interdicts, you won't know if the client doesn't tell you. It's going to be a shortfall. Sometimes we get clients and they're very angry. Tells you, listen, I stopped paying my bond. Then you tell us, then we can tell the buyer, listen, this is a shortfall matter. We'll do our best to smooth out the process as soon as possible. Then they know, but then you don't have to tell them that, because sometimes they don't want to buy a property because it takes a bit longer.
Yeah.
But if you maybe mention it to them, but don't tell them it will take long. Okay. Okay. In most instances, we have to apply for bridging finance then. But that we will also do at the end of the transaction. Some banks forces us to use a certain bridging company, like FNB forces us to use Redal, because they have an agreement with Redal with a very low interest rate as well. Other thing, when it's an FNB shortfall, they also reduce the agent's commission, unfortunately. Sometimes the agent's commission is already below that percentage. Otherwise, they will tell you, for example, the agent's commission may not be more than 5.5% VAT inclusive, or 5.5% exclusive of VAT, whatever is less. They will say something like that as well. We will let you know. You won't have a choice. You have to accept it. Provide us with a new commission invoice. But sometimes, as I say, if I did 10 transfers with F&B shortfalls, 9 out of 10 the commission was already under that amount that they wanted. So sometimes it's lucky, other times we have to unfortunately reduce that commission. Okay. The same F&B is very strict. They even let us sign documents. If there's a refund from City of Tshwane from the client, we have to pay it over to F&B. We're not even allowed to refund it to the seller. So yes, it's very, very a lot of information. I'm going to see additional processes. But yeah, that's basically what I wanted to mention from the. But if it's a shortfall matter, there's no extra costs for the buyer. You don't have to worry about that. It is all the seller's costs, unfortunately, but it is. And yeah, with cost as well. If you need any quotations, we'll be able to provide you with a dummy quote. We are not allowed to give a quote with discount. It is regarded as touting. If any other firm sees it, they can report us to the LTC. So if ever you have a transaction and you see, say, this client, the cost of 30,000, for example, you say this client can only pay 29. Please help. I'm not allowed to give a quotation for 29,000.
Speaking about fixtures and things that need to be fixed on the house, is that what you?
No,
transfer
Oh,
costs.
transfer costs.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
I was looking at fixtures.
No,
there,
sorry,
I
I
missed
just went, no, transfer costs. So,
Okay.
yeah, so we can tell you that we can help the client with the 1,000, we will reduce our fees, but we can only give the 29,000 quote after we receive the insurance. Yes. Same with the banks. If we are, if we receive the bond as well, then usually the banks insist on discount anyways. So it is. So before we also give discount, we must first see what the bond says. If the client is getting 50% from the bond fees, you cannot expect 50% from the transfer. I mean, then you basically get one transaction for free.
So the transfer cost and transfer costs, bond costs, and transfer duty.
Yes.
Are they separate or they are different?
Yes, they're separate.
They're
So
separate.
the transfer duty will also be on the transfer costs quote. So there will always be 2 quotes. The one will be for the transfer costs, and that is for the transferring of the property, and the other one will be for the bond registration costs. It's important to notify our clients that 2 separate quotes, 2 separate payments will have to be made. I tell the clients if we get the bond and the transfer, they can pay it into the same account just to make it easier for them. It doesn't matter. But if it's 2 separate attorney firms, they will have to pay it to 2 separate attorney firms. So that is important. The transfer duty will be added on the transfer cost quote. Transfer duty is applicable if the property is above 1.2.
1 million?
Yeah, is it now 1.2?
I don't know. It's like 1
now
million. 1.2
1.2
now.
yes,
Okay.
I think, yeah, 1.2. Now, yeah. It was 950 and then increased to 1 million, then went to 1.1. Okay, but above a certain threshold, now it's a blind
just went on the one.
Yeah. So there will be transfer duty then. Then transfer duty must be paid. It's an expense. It's a tax payable to Stage. We are not allowed to give any discount on it because
How many percent is there?
it's a gliding scale.
Oh,
So the more expensive the property, the more transfer duty the client will pay. So they must understand that as well. Transfer duty is something that must be paid in advance. Sometimes when a client gets 105% bond or 107% bond, where transfer duty is included, and the client does not have transfer duty, we will have to bridge for that amount. If there's not enough to cover, let's say for example the interest, because sometimes if it's 105% bond, it only covers a part of the transfer costs. So it usually covers all the bond costs because the bond attorneys always take their
First.
and then the balance is available to the transferring attorneys, and in most instances the client must pay in an amount for that transfer cost. Yes, but sometimes it covers everything, and if it's 107, 108% bond, then the client usually also don't have enough for the transfer duty. Then we do a quotation. We ask our bridging company how much interest they will charge for a month, for example. Then we add that to the quote. Then we have enough to pay the bridging company as well. So it depends on every transaction. I wanted to mention something that's very important as well. When you go do your listing at the seller, always tell them to request cancellation figures notify the bank that you are selling your property. Especially all the banks except FNB. FNB is the only bank who does not charge penalty fees, charges anymore. All the other banks charge at least 3 months rent, usually. 3 months
Bond,
installment.
installment,
Yes, that's their
penalty.
If you don't notify them that you're selling your house.
Yeah.
But you have to notify them at least 180 days. If you're selling if your property is started within that 180 days, 90 days, sorry, 90 days.
90 days.
90 days, then that will penalize them. So if you go and do your listing, tell your client, notify the bank that you are selling, make sure that you are, if before that period expires, then extend the bank, notify the bank again. Listen, there are still properties in the market, and they must make sure that they get a reference number from the bank. If they do not get a reference number, they have no foot to stand on.
Okay.
Yes.
And if the property just doesn't sell, what happens then?
No,
Like they just take it off the market?
Yes.
Do they still need to go back to the bank?
No, they need the period eventually expires.
Okay, so just as long as they notify them.
And
So
as
they
long
can
as-
avoid those penalties.
Yes.
And you say it's 3 months rent.
No, not rent, like occupation.
3 months installment
Installment, yeah.
from the bank.
So let's say for example you pay 10,000 rand per month, then they're going to charge basically, it's just an estimate, it's never 30,000 rand. Yes.
That's a lot of money.
That is a lot.
Even the shortfalls, they do not write off that penalty amount. It's very bad. So I would have thought that they would write it off because it's already a shortfall, but they don't. So it's very important. Tell your clients, they'll be very happy that you told them that.
Yeah.
They will be very happy. Make sure that they have a reference number as well. Reference number, because and they must diarise it themselves because we won't know when it expires. They must diarise it themselves saying, end of this month it's going to expire, I'm going to extend the period now. And they extend the period. Otherwise penalty fees will be charged. Okay. Yeah, it's very expensive as well. And then something else.
Do they need to give the bank any other information from the agent's side?
No, just the bank never gets the agent information unless it's a shortfall. Then they want the FFCs, the commission invoices and things like that. Otherwise, never. And when you send us an OTP, we can send it, if we get the figure, it's very good to have because we can draft the documents correctly. Please send it with. Together with, if you have bond approval, the mortgage originator's details, please send the details of the bond originator so we can be in contact with them from the beginning. If the bond cancellation number, the seller, let them give you the bond cancellation number, the bond account number, or the statement of the bond statement, so we can have at least the bond number, request the cancellation figures on the same day we get the instruction. It's just proactive, because then you have all the information and you have the correct information. So do not let them write the B number that's on the title deed, the bond deed. Sometimes the clients write the B number there. It's not, we don't need that. We need the account number.